everybody, welcome back to the Nostalgically Hip podcast. I'm Andy.
And I'm Ryan.
And we have a guest for you tonight. And our guest is a former Navy chaplain. And, we'll just let him introduce himself.
Hey, everybody. My name is Zach Speegle. I've been an ordained minister since the year 2000. Like you said, I became a Navy chaplain where I served the Navy as well as the Marines, and retired in 2017, and now a high school teacher.
Nice.
Wow. So how did you go, before we get into our topic, how did you go from being an ordained minister to being a high school teacher?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot, because most of the time chaplains, when they get out, whether they retire, they just do 1 or 2 tours to get out. They become pastors at local churches. And for me, that's just not something that I chose that I want to be my career path, because before I became a chaplain, I was always working in a support role as assistant pastor or, executive at various roles, but never the, senior pastor, the guy writing the checks and the guy preaching every Sunday, taking up the offering. So when I got out, I decided that I did not want to draw my salary from people giving in offering plates. And again, that's a decision that I made. Not that I disagree with the concept of people giving offerings, but for me, that's where I just made a personal decision that I want to earn my salary elsewhere and not live off the church, so to speak, so that I go to church because I want to, not because it's just a job.
Amen.
Yeah, amen.
That sounded like you needed an amen there. I don't know if it was warranted or not, but by God, you got one. That's impressive, man.
Right, for sure.
I'm all right. I'm humbled again, man.
Appreciate that.
So, Zach was my roommate at Wounded Warrior Empire Academy, and we had some fairly deep conversations, I think, in between him thinking I'm just batshit crazy and everything else. But we got to talking about, obviously, religion. Mm-hmm. My take, I was brought up in a religious household. I'll just go ahead and be honest. I've lost faith over the years. Mainly in the institution of religion, not so much religion itself. I don't care what you believe, who you believe in, who you worship or whatnot, but I just think that the institution as a whole is extremely corrupt. And, let's just call a spade, and Catholic Church is the best example. Mm-hmm. They're as crooked as, well, as my Johnson, if it was long enough, I guess, but it's not. Gen X sucks. But anyway, what I really want to talk about tonight, and why I asked Zach to be on the show, is exorcisms. Mm-hmm. So I've always been fascinated by it. I have a hard time believing it. I know there's evil in the world. I'm just not so certain that people are out there being possessed. Now, if we look way back in the Middle Ages, of course, possession was used to diagnose a wide variety of mental health illnesses. And that's just because they didn't understand it. So I see from that perspective. But moving into where we're at now in modern age, it just seems like a lot can be answered by science and by medicine. Zach, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about the way. Again, this type of stuff, I don't want to say excites me, because it not in that way. But what I'm glad about is that the overall thinking of this thing of exorcism and possession is going in the direction of, I would say, sanity. In that, like one of the leading exorcist trainers in the United States. His name is Andy Bly, and he works out of Pittsburgh, but he trains the people who become licensed exorcists. I think there's only around 100 in the whole country right now. But his first step when he trains people is he has them undergo a thorough medical and mental health evaluation before they even pursue any more talks or thoughts about it possibly being a possession, because there's so many conditions that could mimic what you might consider someone being possessed. If you've got start coming down with epilepsy, somebody might say, well, that person's demonically possessed or whatever, and they just need some medicine. This person may be developing schizophrenia or dementia, all these things that could be mental health issues. And we can talk more detail in a few minutes, but when we're talking about possession and exorcism, all the trained exorcists, and I want to make sure that everyone understands I am not one, but I've studied this enough to know that it's very common for these things that happen in these exorcisms to be unnatural, meaning not explainable. And also the fact of the matter is they in my opinion, they are rare and they're always extraordinary, meaning, this is not some type of something that could be, like you said, replicated by a medical condition. And C.S. Lewis said it this way in the Screw Tape Letters. He said there's two problems with people's thinking on demons, because when we talk about exorcism, we're generally talking about exorcising a demon. And so he said there's two issues with that. One is to disbelieve in their existence altogether, and the other is to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them, and what I would call, looking for a demon under every rock. So for me, I fall somewhere. Thankfully, I fall somewhere in the middle of that. That I certainly don't disbelieve it, but I don't go looking for it. I wouldn't say it's under every rock, and I definitely don't excuse anything that I can. And as demon or demonic, and especially, there's a lot of people out there who would even justify their sin to say, well, it was, the old devil made me do it, kind of stuff. So I think I feel personally that it's dangerous to say that demons and evil doesn't exist, but it's also very unhealthy to think that so much is influenced by that when they're in fact. It's a rare occasion, in my opinion, despite what may look like at Hollywood, or some TV show. So.
Right. Well, you answered my question, because my next question was going to be, do you believe in demonic possession and demons and whatnot? So you pretty much answered that. The other thing I want to ask, though, is have you ever personally known of a case that you were maybe removed 3-4 people by? Not like Hollywood or, was The Exorcism the movie, but anything more along your time frame.
Sure. One of the first pastors that I worked for, he was actually himself delivered from demon possession and became a pastor, and was a very successful evangelist, what we would call a person who goes from church to church and preaches revivals, that doesn't pastor a specific church, but they get asked to come be a guest speaker. And he still pastors today, but he was a younger pastor then, obviously, but he was the first pastor that I worked for. And so many people knew how just and he'll tell you a bad guy was, all the stuff that he participated in, and he in fact invited this possession to him. He invited it to happen. It wasn't something that just stumbled upon. And there were many people that I know that were witnesses. I was not there for that personally, but there were many witnesses in the church service where he was delivered from that demonic possession. And to hear how many people know how bad of evil really doing a person that he was, and the kind of things that he did versus who he is now. To me, you don't just flip that switch overnight. And so that's really the closest connection I had. And then I would say just one person in my career as a chaplain that I ever encountered that I truly believed was suffering from demonic possession. And it was something that thankfully I didn't have very long experience with. It was a person that I met very briefly from another chaplain who said, "Hey, I really want you to come meet this guy and see if you can give me, some heads up. Give me your opinion on him, because I know what I think. Let me know what you think." So again, that's really two people that I'm pretty sure of, and that's out of 23, going on 23 years now. So that's why I said I believe it to be a rare occasion. Now, what is more common, in my opinion, is what we would call oppression, meaning and that can, and generally Christian people, ministers who study this, do not believe, and me included, do not believe that a Christian can be possessed, because that that house, so to speak, is already being indwelled by the Holy Spirit. But a Christian can certainly be oppressed by demonic work. There are several places throughout Old Testament and New Testament. But I would, one of the more popular ones would be Job, where the devil goes in front of God and says, "Hey, I would like to." Sort of make this guy's life hell, and God allows it to happen in order to prove that Job serves God and not the devil. And so there are plenty of instances where uh, demonic activity influences negatively Christian people, believers, to the point where they suffer. Apostle Paul was definitely had a lot of ailments and issues that could be pointed to for demonic oppression. One he called the thorn in his side, which really wasn't an actual thorn, but
We call it
things
the
like
wife.
right. So there are plenty of examples of oppression, and a lot of the people, the exorcists who deal with this. Talk that I've seen talk with people who they found out are just really oppressed. They're dealing with unnatural depression, different things that's going on affecting their sleep, etc. That when they go through a deliverance process, they get healed from. Again, we're not talking about someone who deals with the mental health condition of depression. These are, all the onset sort of unnatural stuff that goes away with these deliverance prayers and interventions. So for me, the oppression is definitely possible, but the possession is not. And so I describe it sort of like the Avatar sequel's out right now. So if you think of it as kind of the Avatar way, where the person, the human on the one side, gets into the host and becomes the person inside the avatar. I don't remember all the names. I haven't seen the sequel yet, but they kind of plug in and then they become that person on in the jungle, running around. Looks is a different person. So kind of the same way where when a person invites demonic possession, they are inviting that demon to sort of plug into them and be able to use that body for various things. And that's something that's invited, something that's very rare in my opinion, but certainly something that is possible. And that's why I said earlier the Christian would have that sort of plugged in by the Holy Spirit. That house would be already has somebody in it, so to speak, and not be available to be housed by anything else. So,
Yeah. I got a question, Zach. Do you think that people that are maybe more religious kind of have that influence of God are more likely to think that they're possessed? Or, I mean, if it's something that you think of a lot, it would stand to reason that, well, when something maybe is a little off or a little different, like you're saying, that no more than likely to think, well, maybe it's a demon. Maybe I'm just possessed.
yeah, absolutely. When you hear something a lot, you tend to get that thinking that, hey, maybe that's me. Like I've seen on there's some things. I've not seen it on there, but I've heard that there's some things going on like on TikTok where people will talk about, well, I have bipolar. Now suddenly there's this upsurge in doctors seeing teenagers coming and thinking they have bipolar because they're hearing it talked about all the time. So especially if you go to a church that is generally more charismatic in nature, especially if you have a particular preacher that really loves to talk about the devil, and they're talking about Satan, get behind me, and stomping on the demons. They're saying these words over and over and over. And so when someone's dealing with maybe just life issues, then they suddenly think, well, maybe this is a demon that's causing my issue, and it becomes convenient to explain that away. And sometimes you're just either lazy or a bad person, and you want to be able to explain it away by saying, well, it's a demon, I can't help it, or something like that. But so to answer your question, I think more religious people get involved in that because they hear it so much, or more than the average person. I think it would be the same way with something supernatural like ghost hunters. They would see more ghosts than the average person because they believe that they're looking for it. They're attuned to it, if you will. So I think whatever you're around and you get exposed to a lot, that's what you tend to gravitate toward.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that would bring me to another question would be, do you feel that it's in any relation, and like maybe a mental illness, mentally disturbed people that this would more likely be a case in?
Sure, and and again, sometimes the person who's mentally disturbed, the first thing that there's so much sort of, I guess, a little bit of knowledge about demons and possession that when someone's acting, let's say, out of character, or let's just say they're acting what we would call insane.
Right.
We were easy to say that, well, that's a demon or that's demon possessed, but what the expert exorcist will tell you is that when they're dealing with an actual demon, an example, they'll start talking, and the demon will start talking in ancient languages that nobody is, except for maybe biblical experts and anthropology, those fields, talking Latin or even older type of languages that the common person would know.
Aram-
The what was that?
Mm.
Aramaic,
Right,
Aramaic.
yeah, Aramaic. And so, things like telling secret sins of the priest that's trying the exorcism that nobody except the priest knows.
Mhm.
These just extraordinary things, not they're foaming at the mouth, not they're, possibly having a seizure, not vomiting, although that has been listed as,
The
sometimes being,
projectile vomiting
but
that, or the infamous
Suit.
Exorcist, right? The movie that
right.
was, and head spinning. No head spinning, I
Right.
bet.
Yeah, and a few have said again, in the these people that do this for a living said that it's rare, but they have seen people levitate. It's happened. So these are not things that can be medically or mental health wise explained. And so that's why I said earlier, I'm glad that they're taking the approach of, hey, let's rule out anything medical or mental first, instead of just jumping right to the demon, and thinking that's the answer for everything.
For sure, that makes sense.
Well, you mentioned what you mentioned about if you hear it so much, you see it,
Mhm.
upticks and things. That remind me instantly. I'm going to get a little bit political for a second, but of the whole transgender thing.
Mhm.
Everybody's jumping on that bandwagon right
Mhm.
now, and 10 years from now, we're going to see all these uptick in suicides. We're going to see an uptick in reversal surgeries and just kids that are screwed for the rest of their lives mentally.
Mhm.
But anyway, enough about that.
Well, and that even opens the door to I would have. I think I'd even heard something that the movie The Exorcist, it was so big in what, 74,
In the
because
'70s, yeah.
going back, and that opened the whole door to people all of a sudden, hey, maybe that's me. Kind of like what you're, in regards to what you're saying, is if it's on your mind, if it's
Right.
at the forefront, and then something just kind of trips it. Next thing you know, hey man, maybe I'm in this. And I'm not saying I'm not writing it off, because I, like you were just saying, if people are levitating, that's a whole other monster that I'm not ready to
Right.
get into. But I mean,
It's a whole nother demon that you're not ready to get into.
right, whole other demon, whole other demon. But it definitely, I do know there, that kind of, wouldn't you say, Zach, that kind of kicked it off, was the Exorcist, and then it became more mainstream, and then you know.
Sure. I mean, it certainly influenced the culture, But going along with that, when there's a movie about a true story, let's just assume that that was a true story. But when they make a movie about a true story, the reason that it's a movie is because it's very unique and very rare.
Mhm.
And so that's why I say if it happens all the time, no one's going to watch a movie about it. So, assuming it was a true story, assuming that it was, then that's an example of a rare occurrence. And so, of course, the popularity made it. Well, let's find out where more of these possessed people are. If they're possessed in the movie, I bet the person that I hate at work is possessed. I think my mother-in-law is possessed. Whatever the case may be. So when it influences a culture, I mean. Andy's exactly right. Any hot button topic that people suddenly start talking about, it becomes all of a sudden now. Well, and I was on a website the other day that had a pop up and said, take the survey to see if you're, transgender. It's the hot topic right now. 10 years from now, it'll be something else. So 20 years ago, no one was talking about this kind of stuff. So what becomes popular, what you see on the news and now with social media, I mean, these topics go everywhere. And generally nowadays, the louder you are, the more you get received, unfortunately. So.
Mhm.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, You had started to steal some of my thunder there, Zach, just a little bit. When you were talking about oppression, the Catholic Church. I'm so anti-Catholic, but I'm going to go back to them because for whatever reason, they're the authorities on exorcisms. Who made them ready for it? Who made them God, right?
Right.
I don't know. Anyway, but there's 4 stages of possession according to the Catholic Church. The first one is infestation. The second stage is what you mentioned, oppression. The third is obsession, and then lastly is possession. And now, even amongst, and I'll go back and I'll review what each of these stages are, but even amongst the Catholic Church, it, it's so petty, man. They're arguing and worried about the word possession. I get it, right? It's God's. We are all God's children, right? That's God's body. He created it, whatnot. But can we not get hung up on the word? I mean, can we help people that need to be helped instead of, the cardinals and the bishops and the infighting of a word? I,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. All right, that's my soapbox for the moment. I won't say for the night because I'm sure I'll have plenty more. But so my memory sucks, so I had to take a few notes. Infestation is it says here infestations affect only property, objects, or even animals. So what they mean by this is like your standard haunted house, I guess. Hearing footsteps or knocks or noises in the house that otherwise can't be explained. And then oppression, which is where the activity steps up with physical attacks, sleep disturbances, including regular nightmares, frequent and severe illnesses, major depression and anxiety, severe financial or employment problems, and relationship troubles. Um, Now, granted, one could say that these are things that happen throughout normal course of life, but the oppression stage is basically where, like Zach said earlier, it comes on like that. It's out of the blue. It's completely abnormal to any other way that the individual's been living prior to that. So it's noticeable from that standpoint. Um, Granted, if you're like we were lowly nothings in the military for a long time, living paycheck to paycheck, that's not oppression, man. Although one might say the man's keeping you down,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what they're talking about
Yeah.
here. And then obsession, as the name implies, at this stage, the afflicted person has a hard time functioning, being constantly preoccupied with thoughts of the demonic activity commandeering his or her life, and frequently with thoughts of suicide as well. And the last bullet there says that sleep becomes nearly impossible. Well, welcome to my world.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep's impossible
Are you
for me.
possessed now?
Some could argue.
Yeah.
Uh, some may say that I'm not possessed. I'm just a straight up friggin' demon.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
the jury's still out on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me know.
Yeah. I'm sure you'll be like the third or fourth to know.
Right.
And then lastly, possession. And and I think this is going to kind of get into what we were talking about just a second ago. Contrary to popular belief, possession is not demons entering a person's body and taking over. It's a person's free will is never removed, only severely compromised. In possession, a person is so physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually broken down by going through the other 3 stages that demonic spirits are able to seize occasional control over that person's actions. And then Zach mentioned a lot of these earlier, but some of the telltale signs, according to the Catholic Church, mind you, it's not Andy's
Right.
telltale signs.
You're making all this up, aren't you?
Totally, because everybody knows I can't read. Uh, Superhuman strength, speaking in a language the victim doesn't know, like Zach mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
an inordinate aversion to holy objects, knowledge of events or facts the victim could not possibly know, and changes in facial features. That one I found
That is.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, that kind of takes you back to The Exorcist, right? Because
Right.
that was a big thing. But is that, Zach, something that, I mean, that sounds like we're really reaching out, but is that
Well,
something
I
that
think it's, again, this is not to say, obviously, I'm not saying that I agree with everything that the Catholics teaching on this, but the stuff that he's saying is what I believe that when this happens, it's not questionable what is causing it. And so, again, this is not something that can be mimics any other physical or in those earlier stages, it definitely can.
Mhm.
But once you reach that point of possession, there's no doubt to the person who's dealing with this, like an exorcist or someone who is interacting with a person, there's no doubt that something is not right. This is not a natural problem.
Yeah. In case you didn't pick up on it, I'm kind of beginning to lead you down that dark path of your exorcist confessions of whether you believe or you don't believe. So I'm about ready to, like a lawyer would do, I'm locking him in
Right?
here.
Right. Well, another good thing that I've noticed too is that well, it goes back to I don't know if you've heard the term well, you've heard the term mesmerized, but I don't know if you've studied the Frank Mesmer, where that term comes from, but he had this teaching back in the late 1700s that there was just some sort of special fluid that he could activate and heal people and do all these things. And so when you talked about that obsession, that's what reminded me of that, where they called it being mesmerized. That's where the word came from.
Mm.
And so, but during that time, they were doing things what we would call the placebo effect test. Even then, Benjamin Franklin was involved in that on a team that studied mesmer over in France. And so before that, the bishops and the priests, there are some bad ones out there for sure, but historically throughout the church there have been amazing philosophers and scholars in the church who were doing these things, and they actually started doing this in the mid centuries, where they would take when you mentioned the artifacts, that reminded me, they would take water, regular water, and they would splash it on these people that were saying they were demon possessed, and the ones that would fake like it, they would tell them it's holy water, but it was not blessed holy water. And then they would also take artifact. They would just take something off the ground that meant that was literally a rock, but it would tell them it was something that was an ancient relic of power in the church. And if they started reacting to that, they knew they were lying. So even though we look back at that time as like, hey, they didn't know a lot of stuff, they were smart enough to smell a fraud a lot of times. And so and that's another thing they still do today. A lot of exorcists will do that. They will say, what's in my pocket, what's the holy relic is in my pocket, what is it? And there may be nothing in there. And if they say, oh, it's the something of the Mary or something, they know they're lying. So not only do they try to rule out the physical and mental stuff, but they also have some ways of ruling out some frauds too. And in my opinion, I think the biggest difference between the Catholic the reason there's so much material on exorcism in the Catholic Church is because they're the only ones who have really codified a program that can be almost like a course. This is the process that you go through, where a lot of other churches, Protestant churches, this is pretty well known that many of the other Protestant churches are all separate. They're separate, governed, separate body. They're all many of them are independent. So there's no one group that comes together and say, hey, we're all going to agree that this is the way we do an exorcism, because nobody's in charge. So the
Mhm.
Catholic Church have done the most work in saying, here's the process when dealing with someone who is possessed. And again, they have a whole training process. So that's why when you look online, you'll see the Catholic Church teaching on the exorcist, because they're really the only book in town when it comes to stuff like that.
Mhm.
Besides some individuals that might have something on their website, but as far as, hey, this is the process that we do, the Catholics are the only ones in town doing it. So,
Right. I wonder, and this is kind of, if exorcisms existed, if or possessions existed, I wonder what would be a proper candidate. Would it be someone who's suffering from depression, someone who's maybe um, mentally weak? Just kind of open. We discussed the open, maybe they're more, but if it actually existed, I wonder what would be what would make for a good vessel, a good prospect to a demon.
yeah. So the going thought is that there's a medium of some sort. You might have heard that term used describe a person, like in the scripture in the Bible, it calls like what like a tarot card reader or something, person, a medium, as in they're kind of got one foot in our world and one foot in the supernatural. But many of the exorcists will tell you that the invitation, so to speak, comes from some can come from some object, like let's say, for instance, tarot cards. Okay, if you went out and bought a pack of tarot cards, those tarot cards that you bought at the store are not possessed. They're not, enchanted with some sort of magic that when you open it, you're possessed. But when a person who buys the tarot cards believe that that's how they're communicating with the spirit realm,
Hmm.
that opens the door for the evil spirits to come in, sort of like a
Like
guide,
kind of.
a seemingly peaceful spirit that says, "Hey, I'm going to communicate with your dead loved ones, and I'm going to give you insight on this, and I'm going to the first appearance is, hey, this is something that supernatural that will help me." So it's not the tarot card itself, or it's not uh, the pentagram or whatever symbol you want to use. It's not those things in of themselves. It's like a Ouija board. The Ouija board that you can buy at Walmart, or I don't even know if they still sell them or not. The Ouija board that you can just go buy in itself is not a connection to the spirit. But when the person believes it's the connection, that gives, and again, this is my opinion, that becomes the medium to the
Yeah.
spirit realm to allow those talking. So that's also where I don't agree with a lot of the anti-Christian rhetoric of things like movies like if you remember the Harry Potter series, people went crazy saying that, oh, if you watch it, you're going to be demon possessed, you're going to do all this black magic. Well, sometimes it's just a movie, but
Hmm.
a person could get so obsessed with that to believe that if they say these spells, that they go and look for a different book. It's not say it's not Harry, but they say that Harry Potter is influence. They say, hey, I want to go look up some spells out of the satanic Bible or whatever. That's the medium that gets them connected to that spirit realm, and that's not something that is by accident. You're not driving down the road and there happens to be a demon crossing the road and it jumps in you. And
So if I understand you correctly, anything can be a conduit. This
okay,
this damn iPad, tablet. If I believed enough, it could be a conduit.
yeah,
Am I understanding that right?
yeah, absolutely. And again, there are more popular ones that we've just talked about that people that practice the occult would say, "Hey, this is it." Well, it's not unsimilar to our maybe wearing a crucifix necklace is common. So we would say, "Hey, this reminds me that that what the cross did for me, that God is my protection." So a person that practices black magic, the occult, those type of things, they would say this image or this thing is where I gain my power from. And it may be something that does nothing for somebody else, but for them, that's their. You think of the Leonardo DiCaprio movie Inception, where they all have their little trinket that is special to them. That's how they know whether they're in the dream cycle or not, stuff like that. So there's many common things that people use that are more common than others. But you're absolutely right, Andy. If I could say something that any trinket that belongs to me and think that has special powers, that's a gateway toward the spirit realm. Whereas if you were in possession of it, you might not think anything about it. It's not going to transfer something to you just because you picked it up. So
Got it.
Well, I guess I got to ask the question then. This is kind of vague right now, but what is your take on them? Do they? Does this exist? I mean, we know exorcisms exist. This demonic possession, does that really take place? Do you feel that it does, or what is your view on it?
yeah, I feel that it does. And if it doesn't, then Christianity in itself has a big problem
Okay.
because Jesus, as recorded in Scripture, is the only exorcist. He is the most famous exorcist, in fact. And in the beginning of his public ministry, and if you any Bible that's laying around, you could open up to the Gospels. Most people know Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. You turn up to Mark chapter 1, the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, and he heals a man that is demon possessed. And the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all the religious leaders around him are astonished, and they say, "What is this new teaching? We've never seen something like this. That this man even has power over unclean spirits." And so I pulled up another verse that I wanted to mention when we were talking about mental illness earlier. Later on in that same chapter, Mark chapter 1, it says, that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered together about the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. So, there are multiple examples of where they separate the physical illness from demon possession. So it was not Jesus thinking, oh, this man's sick, so it must be a demon, let's cast it out. He would heal the sick people and cast out those who were possessed with the demon. And so in the New Testament was written mostly in Greek. So the word for mental illness that they use, it actually is the word that they use to say moonstruck when they would call it for mental illness. They described it as a moonstruck. We get the same word, the same similar word, English word that we use comes from the same luna, meaning moon, that we say lunatic. So um, there's another word that they use in there. Uh, it's called paralytikos, but paralytics, people who can't walk. And so the Greek uses three different terminologies for people. One, people who are mentally ill or moonstruck, as they would call it, people who are possessed by demons, and people who are physically sick. So in the script, there's verses in Matthew that. Matthew's gospel as well. All the gospels, I'm just the ones I'm referencing right are from Mark and then Matthew chapter 4. So, um, for me, if there are no demons and demonic possession, then Christianity has a major problem in that Jesus became popular in his time because he was an exorcist. So it gets back to that question. Is he who he says he was, or was he a fraud? So if all that's a fraud, then his public ministry, the most well known, I guess person on the planet, if you will, globally, was a fraud if demons and possession doesn't exist, because in his beginning of his ministry is just filled with people that he was casting out demons of. So again, Christianity's got a big problem if there are no possessions. So.
Yeah, and speaking of Jesus and being the first exorcist, I'll bet he had no problem. I bet it was real swift too.
Oh yeah.
He just probably snapped his fingers, and you see it in the movies, and it's like a big charade, and
Big
they take a
ordeal.
break, and then they come back.
I mean, Jesus was the man.
Jesus is just wiping that out, like gone.
And this. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm sure his favorite word for bye, Felicia.
Well, and the scripture actually confirms what you're saying. He sends the 12 out, his disciples, and he sends a group of 72 of his students out. And so at one point, a man comes to him and says, "Hey, Jesus, my son is possessed, but your disciples couldn't do the exorcism." And Jesus' response is pretty much like his frustration. Is how long do I have to deal with this faithless generation? And immediately he casts the demon out, and the disciples come up to him like, what was the problem? What were we doing wrong, basically? And Jesus' response is pretty simple. He says, these only come out through prayer and fasting. And so this is not something that you can do uh, uh, afterwards. This is something obviously that leading up to you doing these things, it requires prayer and fasting, basically saying that the disciples had not prepared themselves enough to have the authority. And I would say that most most people would believe that Jesus is the only exorcist as well, not just the first exorcist, but the only exorcist. To my knowledge, there's no Christian exorcist who believes they have the power over the demon, but they are the vessel through which God has the power of the demon. So there's a verse in Acts chapter 19, where some of these Jewish exorcists who were not students of Jesus, who saw Jesus do these exorcists, and says, "Hey, maybe I can get a learn. I can go see what he said, and it's going to work for me, and I can make some money off of it, that kind of stuff." So they pronounced the name of the Lord. They used the recipe, so the spell, so to speak, but they thought they had the power. And so the evil spirit told them, this is Acts chapter 19, it says, "I adjure you by the Jesus whom Paul preaches." Sorry, let me skip down up. I'm looking on my little iPad here. But the evil spirit answered them, the people who were trying to use Jesus' name, and they tell him, they say, "Jesus I know, Paul I know, but who are you? So they were not under the power of God to do this. So and it says, and the man in whom the evil spirit was in leaped on them, mastered all of them, overpowered them, so that they fled out of the house naked and wounded. So when they're trying to take the spell and use it for their own gain and not the real power, they had no power over the demon. And so my belief is that I nor anyone else has the physical or spiritual power over the demon. It's God that has that power, and really it should be people who believe they are called by God to do this, not just any
Joe.
it's
Well, I'm just a
it
tool of the Lord, or what?
right. It's for me. It's like my concealed permit. I pray to God I never have to use it.
Hmm.
I don't go looking for ways to use it. But if it came down to an emergency, that so if it's somebody out in my cul-de-sac causing mischief, I'm going to call the police. Let the police deal with it. I'm not going to go out there trying to be the hero. So in the same sense, if I was dealing with someone I believe to be demonic, I would want the people who try to get the people who are experts in this dealing with it. And I'm not one, so I would want, because of all this stuff that we're talking about, I don't want to be involved with it if I don't have to. I don't want them looking for me. I don't want to go looking for them. Yeah, so you got to be careful when you start thinking that an item or a person, anything has the power over an evil spirit like that.
My wife Connie, she says she's witnessed a possession and an exorcism when she was in the Philippines. It was their next door neighbor, and I'm not going to go into it because I'll completely butcher the story, and I'll probably make shit up halfway through it or whatever. Most of it won't be true, but she swears up and down, and this happened when she was a younger child, but it's left an indelible mark on her.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I'm glad that there are people that believe like yourself. I don't know, man. I can't. I guess I can't wrap my mind around it.
Yeah, and I don't. I'm not trying to run off in a different direction, but last week we covered serial killers, Zach, and we were, that always, whenever I think of evil
Evil.
like that, I watched a movie. I can't. It's called Session 9, like 15 years ago, and it always stood out to me at the very end when the guy they got these tapes of the recording of this mentally ill patient, and he had killed a bunch of people or something. I can't remember exactly how it went down, but he was being questioned, and they were actually talking to the demon on tape. It was like he was
Hmm.
possessed, it turned out, and they asked why he had done it, how he did it, or why he had done what he done and how he did it, and something like that along the lines of that. I'm butchering this, but he said, "I I pray in the minds of the weak," and by that he meant someone that was suffering, someone that was depressed,
Mhm.
someone that was just had maybe given up. Life had become too much, and then when we discussed like what we did last week with the serial killers, I sometimes think to myself, um,
Get it? Yeah.
because it's that's pure evil, and maybe that's someone that's. I think an explanation. We were so quick, or some people are like that doesn't happen. Well, there's a lot of evil.
Oh yeah.
Maybe there's a lot that hasn't come right out and said, "Hey, I'm possessing this guy," and that's just one view that I take on it. Is there's a lot of bad things that people do, and are they capable of it, or is it you know?
There's a lot of evil people, but I think a possession is something completely separate. It's like if it is true, like Zach was saying, then it's one of these
Mhm.
rare occurrences, and unfortunately, we got a lot of serial killers.
Got a lot of killers, yeah.
So
I mean, yeah,
I don't
and
think every one of them's possessed. You know,
yeah, and that's just I don't mean to bring that up because I'm saying that's probably the case. I'm just those are things that I'm always looking at certain things and kind of questioning it and going, man, who would make somebody do that? And then, you can kind of put everything together and go, well, that's a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I think another thing that could attribute to a possible, demonic activity would be the weird, unnatural lack of remorse that a lot of these serial killers have.
Mhm.
Like that, it's impossible for a breathing human being, to have this lack of remorse or lack of, care of what they've done. Because there's plenty of people who have killed and go cry before the judge and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I wish I could take it back." But then when you get into some of the more crazier, if you will, cases, they'd say, "Hey, I'd do it again. It was fun. Whatever." So, to me, that tends to go towards some of that unnatural, that could possibly be. So, I think the answer is, are they demonically possessed or are they not? I think the answer is yes. I think there probably some are definitely under the influence of a demon to do the kind of things that they've done, and then I think other people are just influenced by various things, especially it's very common. You can read it for many of the serial killers who endured abuse as a child. So I think it's possible that they could be demon possessed, but at the same time, not every serial killer, in my opinion, is it's not the prerequisite to be a serial killer, if that makes any sense. But I
Yeah.
certainly think it's possible.
Yeah. It's just something that always makes me wonder, like I said, and then I always come back to that movie because that line always kind of grabbed me. I thought that was so unique that it was said like that, and I thought, man, that
What movie
it
was
was
that
called
again?
Session 9, and
Session
it's at the
9.
very end. It turns out that this guy was just having a rough time in life, and that just like we were talking about, it opened like a vessel
Mm-hmm.
that somebody just said, this guy's perfect, and just hopped right in there and went to work, and and that was, I think the line was, I live in the mind of the weak and the people that are suffering, the people that are hurting, the people, and if you can, if I can find them, I can get in there and I can do my worst, and that's always kind of stuck with me because I was like, man, that's a really good twist on evil, on possession, on killing, and why people do sometimes the ugly
Yeah.
things that they do. And I think you mentioned about there's a lot of it. There's obviously a lot of things that go into it. There's the mental, there's the abuse, there's so much. So when I say that, I'm not saying, hey, that's it. I don't know. I'm just saying, what if there's, you know, one of the things when there's like a mass shooting, people always want to say, um, why did he do it?
Right.
That's always a question. It's always like the first thing. Why did he do it? There's got to be a reason. They start searching.
It's the second thing actually, because the first thing is, all right, let's ban all guns.
Right. Yeah, you got that. Yeah. So but then and then that comes up, and it's always an explanation. And I'm always in the back just thinking, man, sometimes there's just stuff happens, and there's just no
Sometimes,
explanation for whatever reason. And that's what I mean. It could be a multitude of factors,
for
and
sure.
you know,
Zach, what are your thoughts on atheists? Would they be a target-rich environment for possession? Would you think?
Well, I think just anyone that is not indwelt by the Holy Spirit, anyone that's not is a potential candidate, in my opinion. So, to go, I watched an interview recently where an exorcist was talking similar to what you're saying from that movie, where the demon was laughing that, hey, I can't believe they fell for this again. That this particular demon would trick people into believing he was a helpful, you know white light kind of guardian guide or whatever, and then once they got their claws in, then it really turned the heat up and started doing a lot of the bad stuff. And then um, and like we mentioned earlier, it does lead people to attempt suicide because they think, if I have to live with this my whole life, I don't want to live anymore. Or they go to a priest or a pastor or something like that, and then hopefully they get the help that they need if it's genuine. But for me, uh, to, it, to say an atheist because they're an atheist or a moral target, I wouldn't say that. I would say that anyone who is not a Christian has the potential. But I agree for the most part that progression that you uh, read about earlier, those 4 steps, and they really are steps that a person generally accepts and wants. And they want the power, they want some, and sometimes it when the Bible talks about Lucifer being the angel of light, if this group drooling, evil red dragon like person came to you at night and said, "Bow down to me and serve me," most people would get scared or say no because they're like, "Oh, that's the devil." But the devil is not is not red with a weird tail and a pitchfork. So, a lot of times these things come to us as opportunities that we think will be helpful. And then it's like when I mean, not me, but, other people have taken a hit of a drug for free. The dealer knows you're going to come back, for more.
The first
You
one's
know,
always free.
other people, yeah. So it's kind of the same thing. Like, hey, it was helpful, so I invited it to stay and give me some more help. And then it sort of like an abusive relationship. It starts out great at the beginning, and then you start seeing the true colors.
Mm.
So I know you're not Catholic, but have you been following any of the, I'll just say, mess with the Pope and what's going on with the claims possibly of the last Pope who just passed, claiming that what I think they call it the dark priest or something like that. Essentially, they're claiming that the Antichrist is here, but he's here potentially as the current pope. I don't know. They're just kind of throwing things around like
Wow, that
that.
would be a real drop, though, right? Because they voted him. Don't you have to get voted in for that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What have you been following any of that or not really?
No, not that last part of it. I mean, obviously I followed quite a bit when the previous pope died, but I would say that the current pope is actually very pro exorcism, since that's the topic for tonight. He comes from Latin America, and it's very big in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa. The exorcisms are very common, a very common occurrence. Again, genuine or not, it's a more commonplace thing than what we would do here in the U.S. But his experience with it in Latin America, he came out and said every diocese should have an exorcist, and there's like 200 dioceses, something like that, in the United States, and there are only 100 exorcists, so they're still working on that. But he's very much a pro exorcism pope, if you will.
The movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose was supposedly based on a true story, and that was I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. It was a case in Germany, and Annalisa something was her real name, but they basically she died, right? And there was a big court case over it.
There's been a few deaths, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, but that's the one that's probably, I don't know, maybe not the most famous, but
Hmm.
you know, high profile for sure. And the priests, they were they were basically found guilty, uh, but in Germany they basically they walked free because it was like it was unintentional. Obviously, they felt that they were doing the right thing by their faith and whatnot. But at the end of the day, now a girl's dead.
Hmm.
So there's a fine line, I think, between, and supposedly they sought medical, um, you know, had a medically examined. They ruled out supposedly ruled out epilepsy, although they came back during the court trial and said that no, that she actually did have epilepsy, which is one of the reasons why they were convicted. But if you haven't seen the movie, it's well done. It's worth a watch for
Hmm.
sure. But my point is, going back to that 200 dioceses and wanting an exorcist in each diocese. If that's what you believe, then why not?
Hmm.
You know, put an exorcist in each diocese. We're That's the mission, is to help the people, right? So
Yeah, and it's still a big calling because again, if we play the math out, if there's only 100 right now out of a country with over 300 million people, so that's one exorcist for every 3 million people. So obviously they got some
yeah,
pretty big coverage area, like
yeah.
duty 24/7. But
He said,
uh, so yeah, for me, I kind of don't want to know the numbers, but it would be interesting to see, like a map showing, where are they located in the whole world? Are they more, congregated in certain parts, all those kind of things. But at the same time, I don't want to know that stuff. But that's the sad part when you were talking about that court case. That's kind of what I mentioned at the beginning was, those people were looking for a demon under every rock. And there's been cases here in the United States where they've had these just ultra religious parents who thought that something that was the child had ADD, but they were starving their kid to sort of force this demon out, and things like that. That's just unrealistic when it comes to what a normal person would do. So unfortunately, people get so caught up in these things. I mean, that's why cults still happen, because they still will follow people. You find half a dozen documentaries on Netflix right now that shows all these people followed this one guy. It's usually the guy, right? And it winds up being about sex. It always winds up that's the ultimate outcome for this cult, no matter how they start. And so that because those things still happen, unfortunately, you're going to have the people who will believe anything someone says. And if you have a renegade pastor or a person who a faith healer, something like that, that says, hey, they need to fast in order to cast the demon out, you got people who are gullible enough that they'll do it, even if it's their own child.
Yeah. Just lost my microphone there. The Jehovah's Witnesses are really bad about that. As far as I'm not trying to call them out, but okay, yeah, I am. They don't believe in blood transfusions. They don't believe in a lot of medicine. It's very heartbreaking, man, because there's kids out there that have been documented, lots and lots of cases documented that kids are sick, they need a transfusion or whatever the case may be, and the parents straight up refuse because God will take care of my child.
Yep.
Maybe when he gets to heaven, but guess what? He's still here on earth, and there's people that can help. Yep. It's mind-boggling to me, man.
Yeah, regardless of their motive, there should be consequences for that. If they think they were doing it because God told them to, then that's not the God I would believe that would the same God that we all believe that we serve. So they may be hearing from oppressive demonic voice there, but that's the thing is. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were telling me you couldn't hear me, but yeah, that at the end of the day, people have to be accountable for their own actions, regardless of their motive or what they think they're being told by somebody else. So.
Right.
I had on our old podcast, Nothing's Off the Table, I had a UFC veteran on, Nate Quarry was his name, and he told us this crazy story. He grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and when he turned 17, 18, he broke free, and the whole community, his parents, his sisters, everyone shunned him, and he doesn't talk to them to this day. And he's in his mid to late 40s.
Yeah, man, and that's the thing, right? Because they're sometimes so tied to that belief or that following that they'll do things that most of us would look at, like starving your boy or something like that, or beating him to death to get a spirit out or a demon out, and that takes me down a whole other road. And I wanted to ask you this because while we had you on, but it's I heard a thing just I think it was last week, and I think we all already know this, but there's definitely a decrease in religion in this country, and I think maybe even worldwide. I don't know, but I do know in this country from what I had heard, and you can kind of see it. There's it's more today than ever. I'll run into someone who just like you yourself, and I'm not the most religious person in the world, and we're all kind of like, well, I don't even know anymore, and there's not a lot of faith, and that brings me to the question of during the whole COVID outbreak, one of the things that I thought was, I'm not afraid to die. And it's not that I necessarily believe that, I don't want to leave my family and friends and stuff, but I'm also not afraid of it. And it's not because I believe that there's a better place I'm going to, because, I hope that there is. I have hope, and I can only wish, but I can't help but wonder, was the fear that everyone was like, out masking it up and get this and take that and stay inside. I had to ask myself, is that because they don't feel that there's this is it. This is it. I have no faith in anything else. I'm going to cling to this as long as I can. And, and the reason why I thought that is I can remember about 10 years ago, I met this guy and we were talking, and he's just a nice guy. And we were talking, and he was telling me about his
boyfriend,
daughter or something was dating some guy, and he's a lunatic, and he goes, I kind of worry about it, and I just worry sometimes, what he'll do. And I go, well, be careful, don't get killed. And I remember him saying, my faith is strong enough that I'm not worried about that. I'm comfortable where I'm at. And I was almost like jealous for a minute because I was like, I don't have that.
Yeah.
And this guy was
Sure.
had so much faith and so sure that, hey, if that's what happened, that's what happens. He wasn't a tough guy.
Right.
He was just a guy that there was somebody along, had another, he just had something to believe in. So that has always stuck out when I've seen what I've seen with the COVID and people just, oh, this is it. If I lose this one thing, then I don't have anything else. And I'm going to cling to it. I'm going to hurt people. I'm going to make people do things that maybe they don't want to do. And do you think that could be part, like, I think we can all agree there's a lack of religion. Do you think that because of that, we're starting to see it in other areas of life?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the issues that kind of came about because of COVID is that people finally realized that, hey, I'm not going to, again, whether this is true, I'm saying this is the mentality of that, hey, not going to church didn't kill me. I either watched it online or didn't go, and nothing bad happened to me, or whatever the case may be. And so they, start asking themselves, well, why do I have to go every Sunday? Because I didn't go for 6 months or whatever, and nothing bad happened. I had some extra free time or whatever on the weekends with the family. So I think, and that's one reason why the well, I would say, I know it's semantics, but one thing that I'm glad about is that the religious part of it is fading away because I'm very much anti-religious, and in that sense, as far as the religion goes. But I think that with the COVID, it definitely obviously made it COVID outbreak. It made us more isolated, even though we could jump on Zoom calls and things like that, or Skype or whatever. But at the same time, it sort of gave us this independence where we say, hey, I don't have to rely on somebody else to get what I need, or this, that, or the other. So if you're going to a church where the pastor constantly preach, if you don't come to church on Sunday, you're going to hell. Or you can't make it if you don't come to church, and all of a sudden you're not going to church and everything seems the same. You're like, well, maybe he wasn't telling me the truth. So it's sort of this deconstruction that's going on within a lot of the church faith. In fact, that's a popular term right now in a lot of Christian circles, is deconstruction. And that's where people are starting to realize that, hey, maybe just because someone told me as a kid that this is what I had to do, maybe it's not necessarily the best thing for me, or that I have to do. So people are starting to kind of take the matrix effect coming out of the matrix in some of those ways. People who were really like you were mentioning, the person who came out of the Jehovah's Witnesses. You see that in like the documentary, if you watched it on Netflix, about the polygamists, where these people are constantly just leaving the cult because they finally realize, like, this is not right. So people are starting to become more self-aware, and unfortunately more isolated too, even though we have all this technology to connect us. So I think the religious part going away is a good thing, but unfortunately, I think we are definitely missing we definitely lost, and they're still not reestablished the fellowship side of it, meaning that if I'm there face to face with you and shake your hand and able to say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with this week, and you able to say, hey, I got your back. I'll I'm praying for you. Hey, let's get together for a drink or something this week, and we can hash it out and talk it over, and things like that. That really is the some of the basis of what we do as humans is sort of get through stress and anxiety. We help each other out in that way, and so that's my concern, is that we're getting more isolated. But I also think that sort of getting futuristic. I think that's also the beginning of what allows us to be so separated, that things that are prophesied, so to speak, to take place in the Bible could definitely be possible. Things that 20 years ago were like, this is not possible. Another example, moving to digital currency, things like that, that you're like, we didn't have any idea about. 20 years ago, we'd never thought that the U.S. dollar could go away and be converted to a digital, format, things like that, and internet that comes from space. Elon Musk is supplying Ukraine with internet from space, and so at some point it's going to be, everyone's going to have internet no matter where you go because of satellites and everything. It's just again, I think we're getting more isolated, even though it seems like we're being more connected.
Mm.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and that kind of goes alongside with another question I have for you is, and I don't know if you've been on the deathbed of certain people. Have you ever, you know what I mean, where they're dying, and I've heard that those with faith take it so much easier than those that don't. Those that don't have faith are just,
They're panicked.
they're
They're
panicky, they're
anxious.
worried, and again, that takes me back to I said this to my wife when all this was going on. I said, I was like, one thing that I think people should learn from this, whether it's in Jesus or God or Elon Musk or whatever, cryptocurrency, whatever you have it, you got to get comfortable with death. You got to find that, maybe it's your grandma you want to see again. You got to believe maybe you're going to see her again. There's going to be a place where you'll see her again. And I think when there's an emptiness to that side, you don't have it, that what you get is what we kind of seen is, this is it. And once this, I got to cling on, I got to hang on. And I just kind of changed the way I look at everything, honestly, because I think, not that religion can be bad in a lot of ways. There's obviously a lot of instances. We've talked about a lot of them tonight where it can go the wrong way, but there's also times I just think we need it a lot. And I think COVID's a great example of that, because when you're just, life is precious for sure, but yeah, all of us are going to pay that bill someday. And
that's right.
It could be today, it could be tomorrow, but you're gonna, and I just think you better get comfortable with where you're going. And I don't know what it can be, or whatever.
It's funny. Correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, that the Bible mentions heaven a multitude of times, but it doesn't ever really mention hell. Am I wrong?
You are not wrong. No. And that's a very common misconception that maybe people who have been taught a certain way and didn't actually take the time to read the Bible, or people that may not know much about the Bible, just from pop culture, would think that the devil is in, the fiery furnace cave in the middle of the earth somewhere. That's absolutely not true. Never been there. The Bible speaks of an eternal punishment that looks like that will happen after the end of time, so to speak, after we're no longer here. But at this point, the Bible is very clear that he roams around the earth looking for whom he may devour, like a roaring lion. So, he's right now, the devil. I believe that is in a specific place. He's not infinite. He's not all knowing like God. He cannot just be in all places or in multiple places at once. These kinds of things. So. The hell that we believe that many see as the fire and the brimstone and all that actually doesn't exist for people. And nowhere is that mentioned in the scripture. And Jesus himself talks about, makes, like you said, many references to heaven, but very rarely mentions hell. And the few times he does, he talks about a burn pit that was outside of the city. And he would make that reference when things get bad for an unbeliever, that's how it's going to be. And so he wasn't saying, hey, when you die, if you don't say the right prayer, you're going to be going to eternal fire, damnation, because God, the Bible says that God made a place like that for the devil and the demons as punishment for their fall. But that's not the desire for him to put humans there. So I think that's the biggest thing to remember for me is that hell is not a specific place that's inside the earth, and heaven obviously sounds much better anyway. And at the end of the day, if you're right and there is nothing after death, then I'm okay. So, right. But if you happen to be wrong, then that's a different story. So. If I close my eyes and everything is just over, then, I still, like you said, I still have had a positive effect of my faith affecting me. And one thing that I've seen a lot of people that who were dying, older people that maybe didn't live the life they wanted to, they would have rather lived, maybe, not a Christian. A lot of times they will go back to things that happened when they were younger, decades ago, and they want to tell me. They want to like get it off their chest, like, that it's something that they've kind of lived with their whole life. But now that they realize this is going over, they want to, get rid of it, get rid of that weight that kind of they carry with this thing. So I think, like you're saying, there's some very much value to the good part of the religious side of being able to say those sins are forgiven, and I don't have to bear that weight anymore, so that I can die with a good conscience, knowing that I'm going to a better place. And for a Christian, the funeral should only be for the people who survived. It's they're crying and miss the person, but if what we believe is true, that person is, the catchphrase, in a better place, in a lot better situation than what we are.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Zach, I'm not really saying that there's nothing. I don't know if there is. I'd rather not be right, but not be wrong too.
Right.
So I'm kind of on that fence.
That was my podcasting mistake. I motioned toward Andy on my screen. I was talking to Andy on that one. But,
let me address the issue of Jesus and the Bible not having the word hell in there. As any good businessman knows, you never address the competition.
That's right.
He's just a good businessman.
So, Zach, as you know, I had, and you know as well, I had a heart attack, and 2 years ago almost now. I guess she wants to get comfortable. Hey, McScratchy, knock it off. And I remember having that heart attack, and the first thought that came to my mind was, well, I guess today I find out if he's real or not. Mm-hmm. That was the first thought.
I think that's something that, probably not Zach, because he's already knows in his mind.
Right.
But I think that's something that, people that question, that don't know, maybe aren't dead seriously committed would. But I think that's the first thing that's going to come to your mind.
But it was so weird. I was okay with dying. Mm-hmm. I wasn't ready, but I was okay, if that makes any sense at all.
No, let me ask you this though. Since that has happened, we've talked about this before, and you worry a lot.
I do.
You think about it a lot. Some nights you're up late.
Yep.
Has that maybe opened your eyes? Maybe you start looking in a more religious direction?
Strangely, no. What I know is that my time here is finite, and I want to make the best of it. I live a good life. For the not for the most part. I follow the commandments. My whole thing is the institution, like Zach was saying. Sorry, the religious institution itself. I don't need them to coach me how to believe or to pray. Or I know what sin is. I know what it's not. I just believe if I'm a good person that I don't have to be. And I know Zach will disagree with me 100%, but I don't feel that I have to go to church and I can worship in my own way. It's still a belief, and it's still living by his rules. So I don't believe I need to pay a tithe of 10% of my damn earnings. I don't believe I need to go in there and listen to this dude tell me how bad I'm being when this motherfucker 10 minutes later is going to be out in the bars boozing it up. It's just a bunch of contradictions. And
well, you're kind of contradicting yourself right here if you're saying I haven't got more religious, but you're saying in a way, I do all the right things that follow the guidelines of.
I have morals, essentially. I'm
you
not
don't
out
need
there.
Good is good, and you should be good just because.
Right. Yeah. So.
I would say I agree with you in the fact that going to church is not what saves you at all. I mean, if you take the story of Jesus on the cross, the thief next to him got saved, quote unquote, instantly when he was talking with Jesus, and Jesus said, later on, you're going to be with me in paradise. Didn't go to church a single time. And I would also say that, add that Jesus is not a Christian and Jesus is not a Catholic. So your issue with the Catholic Church is not separating you from Jesus, in my opinion.
Yeah. Zach, that brings a good point, too, is that I think that's one of the things, my kids just recently asked me about, what I always say this, and it's very weak. I understand that, especially coming from me to someone like you, I don't want to be wrong. I'm kind of on that fence. I don't know, so I try to live by the good book. Like Andy says, the commandments, and just be as good a person I can while I'm here. But when I was asked this just recently by my daughter, I kind of said, how do you know? Because she was going, do you believe? And I said, I don't know. She goes, well, I don't. And I was like, how do you know though? There's a lot of examples around, and I kind of forget where I was going with this, but there's
it never happens.
Never happened.
Well, that's why it's called faith.
Right.
You have to take that leap and believe.
That's the one thing that I've always, that's it. You got to believe in something.
Well,
I think for me, it's always just kind of been an inconvenience. If I'm being honest, it's like, well, I really, there's a lot of stuff I could see value in, but then, I'm way too selfish to get, like.
Yeah, well, I just think it's not fair that we really only do this to religion. So, if a person died having a heart operation, you wouldn't say, I don't want to have a heart operation because it didn't work for this person. Well, it worked for all these other people. I'm not going to fly on a plane because one crashed one time. We do all that for all these other, if your doctor surely had patients that died as a result of something they did or didn't do. That's why it's called medical practice. So we don't say I'm not going to the doctor because a doctor made a mistake at one point. You may know it or may not know it, but they did. So religion seems to be the only one that's held to this perfect standard. And anytime we put people involved with anything, it's going to get messed up. Whether it's government, obviously that needs no explanation.
So true.
Everything that human beings, especially where there's money involved, because it's like the politicians make, congressmen make this, pretty average salary, but they leave millionaires. How does that work?
I think.
So anytime there's money involved and power involved and people, there's going to be issues. So, and again, I'm not going to apologize for referring back to Jesus a lot, but when you look back at Jesus, the reason he was killed is because he said, you priests are making a mockery of what my father gave you. And, when you think of the common story, where, people have heard where he goes through, cracking the whip on the people in the temple, it's because they created their own currency to say, hey, in order to get help from God, you've got to come buy my wares, and then you take it to the temple. So Jesus is like, hey, that's not the way this works. And so he goes through, literally cracking the whip. And so for me, the reason Jesus was killed is because he was standing up to the religious people who were making a mockery of God. And that's when the religious leaders of the Jewish faith decided that he needed to be killed.
They sold his ass out.
Well,
they sold his ass out.
Exactly. So, again, his major crime was he made them look bad because he was calling them out on their junk. So I don't think it's wrong at all to say, when you say I don't have to go to church, I agree with you that that's not part of our salvation. But like I was mentioning earlier, in a healthy church where you feel comfortable, where there are other people that believe like you, there's power in that fellowship. Not in the fact that you're going to go to hell if you miss the Sunday, but the fact that, hey, I've got other people going through life with me that's dealing with some of this stuff, and we get together and we have like interests. We study, we talk about the Bible, we talk about our life, talk about our family of kids, and developing those types of relationships. It's also connected to the isolation where most adults have very few people, real friends. They have acquaintance people they text, send memes to, but how many real friends do you have that if it went downhill would be there for you no matter what? So that's really where I feel like the faith community becomes a major part of that, is because again, it should be a community of like-minded people who share your faith, share your desire to do things for God and to help other people to live out the gospel and in a way that pleases God, not from some formula.
Yeah, I don't discount that at all. I guess I've had too many negative experiences dealing around the church itself, and then people that are holier than thou and then you come to find out they're the worst sinners, you know, whether it's that you find out on accident or they get busted somehow. And it's just like, and then the first persons that are in your face preaching this. And again, if you find a place where you're comfortable, rock on, man. I just haven't found that place.
You know, having said that, let me ask you this. What does Zach got to do to get you into a new church tonight?
Tonight it ain't happening, I'll tell you that. We can talk about maybe tomorrow.
That's the old car spiel. What do I got to do to get in this new car tonight?
Right?
Well, I do have some advice, though, if that ever happens. Okay, if you go to a church and you meet some people there, okay, it is not typical that you would show your church friends your 50 cal wound. Okay, that's not how we do it.
Well, it is typical at Andy's Church of Brotherly Love.
Right. I'm just saying. So it would kind of be awkward if that's your first interaction with people. It might be a little awkward. So.
Right.
I'm okay with that. They might not be, but I am. Hey, Zach, listen, we've been on this for over an hour now, man, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. Very insightful, very educational, very interesting, man. I enjoyed every second of it, except for when Alma pulled the cable out of the computer for half a second, but. Other than that, I enjoyed every bit of it, and I can't thank you enough for coming on, man.
Absolutely, yeah, and you definitely, there's a lot of, it's always makes you feel comforted too when you talk to someone like you, Zach, and they give you another perspective of maybe opening your eyes and looking around. I always tell my kids, man, just count the blessings. We're so busy looking at all the negative.
Yeah.
All of us look around and we try to look at what everybody's got, and we don't have any of that, and none of us sit there and just count our blessings. And we might think they're meek, but there's people out there that would look at what we've got and just give anything to have it. So
that's right.
I think talking with people like you and opening those doors and just having a conversation in general,
for sure, a
shows
conversation.
We all have differences, and
I'm glad you said that, because nowadays too many people. There's no conversations anymore. There's just arguments. And when people listen, they're listening to respond, to get their point across, instead of actually opening up your ears, opening up your mind.
Even if you don't agree.
Right, yeah.
And that's like, like we both said, I think I don't really have any religious experience in my life, and here I am talking to someone whose life is that. And I may not agree with everything he says, but there's a reason that he believes in it and a reason that he feels it. And that doesn't give me the right to trample on that, And
there's a reason why I asked Zach, because he gives you for somebody like me, I'm pretty simple-minded, and he has a way of breaking it down to where
probably
you
our
can,
problem. We're just too simple.
break it down to where it's easily understood.
For sure, yeah, definitely. So
Zach,
I thank you, Zach, for doing this with us and indulging us and our feeble little minds.
For sure.
You
and the last thing I will say before we wrap this up is I got to point out your shirt, man. I'm digging it.
What is it?
Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
I am a huge Pink Floyd fan.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Huge, yeah. Anyway, Zach, thank you, buddy. And
Yes, sir.
we'll be in contact soon. Everybody else,
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
we'll
Peace
catch you
out.
on the flip side.